My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a frantic, angry little insect in the dark. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the gentle chime for a text or the cheerful ringtone I'd assigned to my sister. This was the relentless, undifferentiated trill of a number I didn't know. My heart, even before my mind was fully awake, clenched into a cold, hard fist. It was 3:17 a.m. No one calls at 3:17 a.m. with good news. I fumbled for it, my fingers clumsy with sleep. Hello? My voice was a rasp, a stranger's in my own throat. Is this Maya Evans? A man's voice, brisk, impersonal, cutting through the last cobwebs of my dreams. Yes, speaking. I was already sitting up, the duvet pooling around my waist. The digital clock's red numbers bled into the darkness. This is Dr. Shaw from County General. I'm calling about your mother, Eleanor Evans. The world, my cozy, predictable world of floral wallpaper and a cat curled at the foot of the bed, tilted on its axis. What's happened? The words were automatic, a script I'd rehearsed in my head for years, ever since Dad passed and left her alone in that big, echoing house. She's had a fall. A pretty bad one. We've run some tests. It appears she's had a stroke. He paused, and in that silence, I could hear the future I had carefully constructed for myself shatter into a million silent pieces. You need to come to the hospital, Ms. Evans. As soon as you can. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember the cold of the car seat through my thin pajama pants, the way my hand shook so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The drive to the hospital was a blur of empty streets and screaming yellow traffic lights, each one a solitary, judgmental eye. My mind was a frantic, scrambling thing. The fundraiser for the community center is next week. I have that deposition on Tuesday. Did I turn off the coffee pot? Mom. Oh God, Mom. This was the beginning. Not of my mother's illness, but of my new vocation. The one I never applied for, never wanted, but was handed to me in a 3:17 a.m. phone call with the finality of a life sentence. I was 34 years old, a partner at a respected law firm, a woman who argued cases before stern-faced judges and won. But in that moment, and for the 8 long years that followed, I became something else entirely. I became a caretaker. And this is the story of how I dedicated my life to that calling, how I poured every ounce of my strength, my love, my very identity into holding the hands of others, only to discover the most devastating truth of all, that when my own hand, trembling and weak, finally reached out from the darkness, there was no one there to hold it. The caretaker became heartbreakingly alone. My name is Maya Evans, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the strong one. The capable one. It's a role that was assigned to me early, not out of malice, but out of necessity. I was 7 when my father, a kind-eyed man who smelled of sawdust and pipe tobacco, sat me down on his knee. My younger sister, Chloe, was wailing in the next room, a tiny, dramatic storm of tears over a broken doll. Maya, Dad had said, his voice a low, warm rumble. You have to look after your sister. You're the big one. You're strong. He didn't mean it as a burden. He meant it as a compliment, a recognition of a quality he saw in me. And I, a 7-year-old desperate for his approval, soaked it up. Being strong became my identity. It was my superpower. When Chloe skinned her knee, I was the one who ran for the Band-Aids and a glass of water. When Mom was overwhelmed with her teaching job, I was the one who quietly set the table for dinner. I learned to swallow my own fears, my own disappointments, because being strong for others was more important. It was what I was for. This instinct to care, to fix, to manage, naturally bled into my career choice. I became a lawyer, yes, but not the kind who chases corporate mergers or defends faceless conglomerates. I became a family law attorney. I was a gladiator for broken homes, a negotiator for shattered hearts. My battlefield was the hushed, wood-paneled courtrooms and tense mediation offices where the collateral damage was always children. My desk was a landscape of human crisis. Photographs of smiling families, now torn in two. Financial affidavits that told silent stories of resentment and control. pleadings filled with words like irreconcilable differences and best interests of the child, words that were so clean, so clinical, for the messy, bloody reality they represented. And my clients, they were my cause. Mrs. Gable, a woman in her 60s whose husband of 40 years had left her for his secretary, her hands trembling so badly she could barely sign her name. I held her hand, made her tea, and fought like a tiger to secure her the house and the pension she had helped build for 4 decades. Then there was David Chin, a soft-spoken engineer whose wife was using their daughter as a pawn in a vicious custody war. I spent late nights with him, going over parenting plans, teaching him how to document every interaction, my voice calm and steady even as my heart broke for the little girl who was losing her childhood to her parents' war. I was more than their lawyer. I was their therapist, their strategist, their rock. They would sit in the worn leather chair opposite my desk, their eyes wide with panic, and I would lean forward, my voice low and sure. "We will get through this," I would say. "I promise you. I am here. You are not alone." And I meant it. Every single time. I built my life around this calling. My apartment was functional, a place to sleep and change clothes between the office and the hospital. My social life withered. A dinner date would be interrupted by a frantic call from a client who had just been served with papers. A weekend away would be sacrificed to prepare for a Monday morning hearing. My friends, initially understanding, eventually stopped inviting me. My absence became a given, a quiet fact of their lives. "That's just Maya," they'd say. "She's always working. She's always helping someone." The biggest casualty, of course, was my relationship with my sister, Chloe. Our childhood dynamic had solidified into adulthood. I was the responsible one, the anchor. Chloe was the free spirit, the butterfly. Where I saw duty, she saw opportunity. Where I saw a problem to be solved, she saw a party to be had. While I was poring over law books, she was backpacking through Southeast Asia. While I was negotiating alimony, she was falling in and out of love with poets and musicians. She lived a life of glorious, charming impulsivity, funded by a series of vague creative jobs and, when things got tight, by our mother. Mom was always her soft landing. "Oh, you know Chloe," Mom would say to me, a fond, exasperated smile on her face. "She just needs to find herself." I loved my sister. I truly did. But a quiet, bitter seed of resentment had taken root in my heart. I was the one who showed up for Christmas Eve with the perfectly wrapped presents and the side dishes, while Chloe would breeze in hours late, smelling of airport and adventure, with a wildly inappropriate gift and a thrilling story that would captivate everyone. I was the one who dealt with the plumber, the taxes, the insurance. I was the one Mom called when the remote control was confusing. Chloe was the one Mom called to gush about a new art exhibit or a film she'd seen. The phone call from the hospital was the earthquake that split this already fractured landscape wide open. In the sterile, humming silence of the ICU, my mother looked small. She was a doll version of herself, propped up on white pillows, a tangle of wires and tubes connecting her to beeping, blinking machines. The left side of her face had surrendered, the eyelid drooping, the corner of her mouth sagging into a tragic, lopsided frown. Her right hand, the good one, plucked incessantly at the starch-stiff sheet. I took that hand. It was cool and fragile, a collection of bird bones and my own. "I'm here, Mom," I whispered, my voice thick with a grief I hadn't yet allowed myself to feel. "I'm right here." She made a sound, a wet, guttural noise that was meant to be my name. A single tear escaped her sagging eye and traced a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. In that moment, every case, every client, every ambition I had ever held evaporated. There was only this. Her. Me. The doctors were kind but blunt. The stroke had been significant. She had aphasia, struggling to find words. Her left side was largely paralyzed. She would need round-the-clock care. Rehabilitation would be long, arduous, and the outcome was uncertain. I didn't hesitate. I took a leave of absence from the firm. Family emergency, I told my partners, their faces a mask of sympathy and thinly veiled concern for their caseload. I don't know for how long. I moved into my childhood home, the air thick with the ghosts of birthday parties and Christmas mornings. It now smelled of antiseptic and the faint, metallic scent of fear. I became an expert in things I never wanted to know. I learned how to navigate the Byzantine labyrinth of Medicare and long-term care insurance. I learned how to bathe a grown woman without humiliating her, how to puree food, how to change an adult diaper with brisk, clinical efficiency that hid the churning in my stomach. My mother's mind was a house with the lights flickering on and off. Some days, she was almost herself, her eyes clear, her speech, though slurred, sharp and witty. We would look at old photo albums, and she would tell me stories about my father, her hand patting mine. Those were the good days. The days that made the sacrifice feel holy. But most days were a struggle. Days of frustration and rage. She would throw her food bowl against the wall, a streak of pureed carrots on the floral wallpaper she had picked out herself. She would curse at me with words I never knew she possessed, her face contorted with a hatred that wasn't for me, but for the prison her body had become. She would cry for her own mother, a woman who had been dead for 30 years. And through it all, I was there. I was the calm in her storm. I absorbed her anger, cleaned up her messes, and soothed her fears. I held her hand through the nightmares and the physical therapy sessions that left her sobbing with pain and exhaustion. I was her daughter, her nurse, her advocate, her whipping post. I was everything. And where was Chloe? She flew home for the first week. She was a whirlwind of dramatic tears and frantic energy. She would fling herself onto Mom's bed, sobbing, "Mommy, Mommy, I'm here," which only served to agitate and confuse our mother. She would offer to help, but her help was like a summer storm, intense, brief, and ultimately messy. She'd attempt to make lunch and leave the kitchen looking like a bomb had hit it. She'd promised to sit with Mom for 2 hours so I could nap, and I'd come down to find her on her phone, scrolling through social media, while Mom stared blankly at the television, her call button just out of reach. After 10 days, she was fraying at the edges. The reality of sickness, with its slow, grinding misery, was not for her. It lacked the glamour of a crisis. "Maya," she said one evening, her voice small. We were in the kitchen, and I was scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that was about more than just burnt oatmeal. I have to go back. My job, my lease." I didn't look up from the pot. "Of course you do, Chloe. It's just, you're so much better at this than I am," she said, and it was meant as a compliment, but it felt like the twist of a knife. "You're so strong. I'd just be in the way." "I'm not strong," I wanted to scream. "I'm just here. I'm just the one who stayed. My strength is just my presence. It's a choice you're refusing to make." But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. "It's fine. I've got it." She left the next day, with promises to call every day, to visit every month. The calls became weekly, then bi-weekly. The visits were twice a year, fleeting, stressful affairs that felt more like a performance of filial duty than genuine comfort. She would send extravagant flower arrangements and expensive, impractical pajamas for Mom, the kind with complicated buttons she could no longer fasten. It was care from a distance. A sanitized, gift-wrapped version of love that required no getting your hands dirty. And so, the years folded into one another, a monotonous landscape of caregiving. My life shrank to the dimensions of this house, this routine. My friends stopped calling altogether. My partners at the firm, after a year, gently suggested I take a permanent step back. My career, the thing I had worked so hard to build, the source of my identity outside of this house, was gone. I was now, officially, only my mother's keeper. The symbol of my old life, my lawyer's suit, hung in the back of my closet, gathering dust. I touched the fine wool of the jacket one day, and it felt like touching the skin of a stranger. In its place, I wore soft, stretchy clothing that could easily be washed, clothes that were designed for utility, not for power. "Maya," she said one evening, her voice small. We were in the kitchen, and I was scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that was about more than just burnt oatmeal. I have to go back. My job, my lease. I didn't look up from the pot. Of course you do, Chloe. It's just, you're so much better at this than I am, she said, and it was meant as a compliment, but it felt like the twist of a knife. You're so strong. I'd just be in the way. I'm not strong, I wanted to scream. I'm just here. I'm just the one who stayed. My strength is just my presence. It's a choice you're refusing to make. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. It's fine. I've got it. She left the next day, with promises to call every day, to visit every month. The calls became weekly, then bi-weekly. The visits were twice a year, fleeting, stressful affairs that felt more like a performance of filial duty than genuine comfort. She would send extravagant flower arrangements and expensive, impractical pajamas for Mom, the kind with complicated buttons she could no longer fasten. It was care from a distance. A sanitized, gift-wrapped version of love that required no getting your hands dirty. And so, the years folded into one another, a monotonous landscape of caregiving. My life shrank to the dimensions of this house, this routine. My friends stopped calling altogether. My partners at the firm, after a year, gently suggested I take a permanent step back. My career, the thing I had worked so hard to build, the source of my identity outside of this house, was gone. I was now, officially, only my mother's keeper. The symbol of my old life, my lawyer's suit, hung in the back of my closet, gathering dust. I touched the fine wool of the jacket one day, and it felt like touching the skin of a stranger. In its place, I wore soft, stretchy clothing that could easily be washed, clothes that were designed for utility, not for power. The end, when it came, was not a surprise. It was a slow, quiet surrender. Her body, after 8 years of fighting, was simply worn out. She slipped away on a Tuesday afternoon, with the autumn sun casting long, golden fingers across her bed. I was holding her hand. Her breathing, which had been a ragged, effortful thing for so long, simply softened, slowed, and then stopped. There was no final word, no dramatic goodbye. Just a silence that was deeper than any I had ever known. I sat there for a long time, still holding her hand, until the warmth slowly left it. I had expected to feel a crushing wave of grief. Instead, what I felt first was a vast, terrifying emptiness. For 8 years, my every waking moment had been dedicated to her. My purpose, my identity, my entire reason for being, had been contained within these 4 walls. And now, it was gone. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful, it was accusatory. It was a vacuum, and I was at its center, weightless and untethered. The funeral was a strange, out-of-body experience. I moved through it like a ghost, accepting hugs and murmured condolences from a parade of faces I barely recognized. Distant cousins, Mom's old colleagues from the school, neighbors I'd nodded to for years. They all said the same things. She was such a wonderful woman. You were such a devoted daughter. She was so lucky to have you. Chloe flew in, of course. She was the picture of dramatic grief, leaning on her latest boyfriend, a silent man named Leo who looked uncomfortable in his suit. She cried beautifully, artistically. People flocked to comfort her. I stood by the casket, dry-eyed and numb. I had no tears left. I had cried them all in the quiet, private moments over the last 8 years. After the funeral, after the last casserole dish had been returned and the last relative had driven away, the house was ours again. Just me and Chloe. The silence was thick, heavy with all the things we had never said. Chloe was packing her small suitcase. She'd already booked a flight back for the next morning. Well, she said, zipping it closed with a definitive sound. That's that. I was standing by the fireplace, looking at a photograph of our family from a beach vacation decades ago. We were all tanned and smiling, squinting into the sun. I was about 12, my arm already possessively around a 6-year-old Chloe. What will you do now? Chloe asked, her tone conversational, as if asking about holiday plans. I turned to look at her. The words felt like stones in my mouth. I don't know, Chloe. I haven't thought about what I would do for the last 8 years. She nodded, not understanding. Not even trying to. You should take a trip. Go somewhere. You've earned it. Earned it. The phrase was so cheap, so inadequate for the life I had just lived. You earn a bonus. You earn a vacation. You don't earn the right to your own life back after you've given it away. What about the house? She asked, getting to the real point. I don't know, I said again, the emptiness inside me yawning wider. I'll probably sell it. There's nothing for me here. Okay, she said brightly. Just let me know what you need from me. I can sign whatever papers. She came over and gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. It felt like being embraced by a mannequin. Take care of yourself, Maya. You're so strong. You'll be fine. And with that, she was gone. The sound of her rental car pulling out of the driveway was the sound of the last thread tethering me to my old life, snapping. The months that followed were a strange, liminal period. I was free, but I didn't know what to do with my freedom. The world had moved on without me. My legal skills were rusty, obsolete. My friends were married with children, their lives full and complex in ways I could no longer relate to. I tried to date, but the men I met seemed like boys, their concerns about sports and stock options felt trivial, alien. How could I explain my last 8 years to someone? How could I make them understand the intimate geography of loss, the muscle memory of caregiving? I was adrift. The house was too big, too quiet. I started having trouble sleeping. The slightest sound would jolt me awake, my heart pounding, ready for Mom's call button, ready for a crisis. But the silence remained, a heavy, mocking presence. And then, the first pain came. It was a dull ache in my lower back at first. I dismissed it. I'd had a bad back for years from lifting Mom. But this was different. It was deeper, more insistent. Then came the fatigue. A tiredness that sleep couldn't touch, a leaden weight in my bones that made the simplest tasks, taking a shower, making a meal, feel like climbing a mountain. I ignored it for as long as I could. I was the strong one. Strong people didn't get sick. Strong people powered through. But my body was no longer listening to the commands of my will. The pain grew sharper, localizing in my side. I started running fevers. I lost weight without trying. One morning, I looked in the mirror and saw a gaunt, sallow-faced woman with dark hollows under her eyes. A ghost. Finally, terrified, I went to a doctor. There were tests. Blood tests, urine tests, scans. I sat in the examination room, the crinkling paper of the table sticking to my legs, and I felt a fear I had never known. This was a different kind of battle. This wasn't about fighting for someone else. This was about me. And I had no idea how to do that. Dr. Evans, a woman my age with a kind, tired face, came in with a folder. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I saw it in her eyes. The pity. I'd seen that look in the mirror for 8 years. Maya, she said, sitting down on her little stool. The CT scan shows a mass on your kidney. It's fairly large. Given your symptoms and the imaging, we have to assume it's malignant. The word hung in the air between us. Malignant. It was such a beautiful, evil-sounding word. Like a jewel that poisoned whoever touched it. Okay, I whispered, my voice barely audible. We need to do a biopsy to be sure, but I've already taken the liberty of referring you to an oncologist and a urological surgeon. The good news is, if it is cancer, kidney cancer often responds well to surgery if we catch it before it spreads. She kept talking, her voice a calm, professional drone. Treatment options. Survival rates. Surgery. Immunotherapy. Words, words, words. They washed over me, but none of them stuck. All I could think was, I am alone. I drove home in a trance. The world outside the car windows, people walking their dogs, kids on bicycles, a couple arguing on a street corner, looked surreal, like a play I was no longer a part of. I walked into my silent, empty house and leaned against the front door, sliding down to the floor until I was sitting in a heap. The biopsy confirmed it. Renal cell carcinoma. Stage 3. The tumor was large, but the scans showed it was, hopefully, still contained. The plan was a radical nephrectomy, the removal of my entire right kidney. It was major surgery, with a long and painful recovery. And I had to tell people. I called Chloe first. I practiced the words in my head, trying to sound calm, strong. I didn't want to scare her. Chloe, I said when she answered, her voice breezy. I have some news. It's not great. What's up? I could hear street noise in the background. She was probably walking somewhere, living her life. I have cancer. Kidney cancer. There was a beat of silence. Then, oh my God, Maya. Are you serious? Yes. I need surgery. In 2 weeks. Oh, honey. Her voice was thick with genuine shock. That's awful. What can I do? It was the question I had been waiting my whole life to hear from her. And now, faced with it, I didn't know how to answer. I didn't need her to do my taxes or talk to the plumber. I needed her to be my sister. I needed her to be afraid with me. I needed her to come home. I don't know, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. I'm scared, Chloe. Of course you are, she said, and I could hear her starting to cry. It was the performative, dramatic crying I remembered from the hospital. Listen, I'm here for you. Whatever you need. I'll call you every day. I'll come for the surgery, I promise. It was the same promise she had made about Mom. And a part of me, the cynical, wounded part, knew it was empty. But another part, the little sister who still lived inside me, clung to it. Okay, I whispered. Thank you. I called my old law partner, Robert. He was appropriately horrified, offered me all the time I needed, told me to focus on getting well. He said he'd put the word out to the old gang. Everyone will be thinking of you, Maya. I called the few acquaintances I still had. They reacted with a similar script. Oh no! Let me know if you need anything. It was the standard, socially acceptable response to catastrophe. A verbal bouquet that wilted the moment it was delivered. In the 2 weeks leading up to the surgery, the silence in my house became a physical presence. My phone, which had once buzzed constantly with updates from nurses and doctors about my mother, was now mostly still. Chloe called 3 times. Each call was short. How are you feeling? Okay, good. Stay positive. I'm working on getting time off, it's just a really bad time at work. The excuses were already beginning to form. The night before the surgery, I packed a small bag. A toothbrush, a hairbrush, a soft, old t-shirt to wear home. I looked around my bedroom, at the dust motes dancing in the evening light, and I felt a cold, clear certainty settle over me. No one was coming. Chloe had texted that afternoon. So sorry, Maya. My boss is being a total monster about time off. There's a huge project launch. I can't get away. But I'll be there in spirit. And I'll call the minute you're out of surgery. Leo sends his love. You've got this. You're the strongest person I know. I read the text, and I felt nothing. No anger, no disappointment. Just a vast, hollow confirmation. The caretaker had no one to care for her. I drove myself to the hospital at 5 a.m. I checked myself in. I sat alone in the pre-op room, dressed in a flimsy, open-backed gown, a paper hat on my head. A nurse came in, cheerful and efficient. All right, Maya, we're just about ready for you. Is your family here? They can come back for a quick minute before we take you in. I looked at her kind, expectant face. I thought of all the times I had been the one in this position, holding a client's hand, a mother's hand, promising them they weren't alone. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. There's no one. Her smile faltered for just a second, then widened again, a professional adjustment. Okay, honey. Well, we'll take good care of you. You're in great hands. They wheeled me down the long, bright hallway. The ceiling lights strobed past, one after another, like a film reel of a life hurtling towards its climax. I thought of my mother. I thought of all the hands I had held. Mrs. Gable's trembling hand. David Chen's clenched, desperate hand. My mother's cool, bird-bone hand. And I thought of my own hand, resting on the stiff white sheet of the gurney. It was alone. The operating room was cold, a brutal, sterile white. They shifted me from the gurney to the table. It was narrow and hard. People in masks and gowns moved around me with a quiet, purposeful economy. I was the center of the activity, and yet I had never felt more peripheral. The anesthesiologist leaned over me. Okay, Maya, I'm going to put something in your fore to help you relax. You'll start to feel a little sleepy. I felt a cold rush in my vein, a chemical tide moving up my arm. The bright lights of the ore began to swim, to soften at the edges. The world was receding, pulling away from me. And in that final, lucid moment before the darkness took me, I reached out. It was an involuntary gesture, a child's instinct. My hand, my lonely, empty hand, lifted from the sheet, fingers slightly curled, reaching for a hand that wasn't there, for a promise that had never been real. The darkness didn't just swallow me, it embraced me. It was the first real embrace I had felt in a very, very long time. I survived the surgery. The tumor, along with my kidney, was gone. The surgeon came to my room afterwards, his face a mask of professional satisfaction. We got it all, he said. Clean margins. You were very lucky. Lucky. I was lying in a hospital bed, my body carved open and stitched back together, a deep, grinding pain radiating from my side with every shallow breath. A part of me was gone, forever. I was alone in a room that smelled of bleach and loneliness. Lucky. The recovery was everything they said it would be, long and painful. I went home to the same empty house. A home health nurse came twice a week to check my vitals and my incision. She was kind and capable. But she was paid to be there. The flowers came. A beautiful, extravagant bouquet from Chloe. Thinking of you. Love you. A smaller, more tasteful arrangement from my old firm. Wishing you a speedy recovery. A potted plant from a neighbor I barely knew. The phone calls trickled in for the first few days. How are you feeling? I learned to lie. I'm okay. Getting stronger every day. What was the alternative? To tell them the truth? That I was in pain, that I was terrified the cancer would come back, that the silence in my house was so loud it was deafening, that I cried every night from a pain that had nothing to do with the incision in my side? They didn't want to hear that. They wanted the strong Maya. The capable Maya. The Maya who was handling it. So I gave them what they wanted. I performed wellness. I kept my voice light on the phone. I thanked them for their thoughts. And when they said, let me know if you need anything, I said, I will, thank you, even though we all knew I never would. Because what did I need? I needed someone to sit with me in the dark and not tell me to be positive. I needed someone to hold my hand while I trembled with a fear so primal I had no words for it. I needed someone to just be there, not as a paid professional or a duty-bound acquaintance, but as a witness to my fragility. But I had spent a lifetime building a fortress of competence around myself. I had been the one who held the umbrella in the storm for everyone else. I had never taught anyone how to hold one for me. And now that I was drenched and shivering, I looked around and found that everyone assumed I was still the one with the umbrella. The climax of my story was not a wedding salute or a courtroom victory. It was not a dramatic reconciliation with my sister. There was no tearful scene where she realized her neglect and begged for forgiveness. Life, I have learned, is rarely that cinematic. The climax was quieter, smaller, and infinitely more profound. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, about 6 weeks after my surgery. I was able to walk to the end of my street and back. It was a cold, clear day. The leaves were gone from the trees, and the sky was a hard, brilliant blue. I was standing at my mailbox, pulling out a handful of bills and junk mail. My body ached. I was tired. And I felt it then, not as a thought, but as a physical sensation in my bones. I was completely and utterly alone. But in that moment, something shifted. The feeling didn't crush me. It didn't send me spiraling into self-pity. Instead, it felt like a truth I had been running from my entire life. I had defined myself by my usefulness to others. My strength was my currency, my love was a transaction of care. And when I could no longer be useful, when I had nothing to give, the world I had built simply vanished, because it had never been real in the first place. I looked down at my own hand, the one that had reached out on the operating table. It was resting on the cold metal of the mailbox. I turned it over, palm up. It was a good hand. It had held so much. It had comforted, fought, cooked, cleaned, and caressed. It was scarred now, from my V's, a little more wrinkled, the veins more prominent. It was the hand of a woman who had lived. And I realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that this hand was enough. It was my hand. It was the only hand I could truly, always count on. The love I had given was not wasted. It was real. It had sustained my mother for 8 years. It had given comfort to my clients in their darkest hours. That love existed. It was a part of the fabric of the universe, independent of whether it was ever returned to me. The caretaker was alone, yes. But she was also free. Free from the prison of other people's expectations. Free from the burden of being the strong one. Free to finally, for the first time, learn how to care for herself. I am Maya Evans. I was a daughter, a sister, a lawyer, a caretaker. I am a cancer survivor. And I am learning, day by painful day, how to be just Maya. It is the hardest case I have ever taken on. But I am no longer alone in it. I have myself. And so, this is my legacy. Not a list of cases won, not a eulogy filled with praises of my sacrifice. My legacy is this quiet, hard-won knowledge, that it is possible to hold so many hands throughout your life and still, in your moment of greatest need, find your own waiting for you. And that, perhaps, is the only hand you were ever meant to hold all along.